We're going to start a movie with audio. You can heckle. We're going to start a movie with audio in a minute here, but after that's done, then you guys will go. All right.
How are you?
Good.
You think you're busy today?
Yep. We got a mic there. You use those before. I'm trusting. Okay. All right. Have a good show, John.
For 75 years, the Coordinated Science Laboratory at the University of Illinois has been pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Born in 1951 to meet the nation's need for advanced defense technology, CSL quickly became a hub of discovery whose influence still echoes today. In its earliest days, CSL researchers developed the electrostatic vacuum gyroscope, a breakthrough that allowed submarines to navigate underwater without surfacing, technology that would later guide rockets and spacecraft. Behind closed doors, the Secret Shack project advanced radar systems vital to national defense. In the 1960s, CSL engineers helped build the first automatic test generators for sequential circuits, which were used to test circuits in the ILIAC series of computers and the first electronic telephone switching system at Bell Labs. More recently, CSL innovations continue to transform our world from fault-tolerant computing that made digital systems more reliable to signal processing breakthroughs behind compact discs, hearing aids, robotics, and drone-based imaging. Its advances in network and information theory revolutionized how data moves and is stored. From the foundations of network coding and wireless capacity limits to the birth of DNA-based data storage. Today, CSL's spirit of innovation is stronger than ever. Researchers are advancing artificial intelligence, autonomy, and robotics, cybersecurity, health informatics, hybrid clouds, the Internet of Things, microelectronics and semiconductors, and emerging computing platforms such as bio-inspired and quantum computing. The Coordinated Science Laboratory, celebrating 75 years of discovery and shaping the next technological revolution.
All right, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? All right, good afternoon. Thank you. ILL. I have to do this. Thank you all for being here. Again, I think we've had a great, amazing day and a half, and we are going to definitely continue that, if not accelerate it, in the next, the rest of the afternoon. So my name is Rashid Bashir. I'm really humbled and honored to be the Dean of the Granger College of Engineering. And CSL, as we have said, it's really the crown jewels of really the foundations of research in the college, right? It's the oldest interdisciplinary lab across the campus and has led to so many amazing technological changes that have caused revolutions afterwards. And we've also had really this honor to have amazing people still here, and also amazing people that have been associated with CSL. And one of them is on stage today. But before we introduce Arvind Krishna, I'll actually now turn it over to Bruce, who will do so. But Bruce Hajek, everyone knows his name, came up multiple times as one of the pioneers in the space of optimization and control and theory. But Bruce, I'll turn it over to you. Bruce was also our department head of ECE the last 5 years. So, Bruce.
Thank you, Rashid. Thank you very much, Arvind, for coming here. Welcome back to the university. Yeah, this is going to be an informal fireside chat, and it's going to be outdoors, so we can pretend we have a little fire here, and and we can these microphones, we can think of them as little sticks, and we have marshmallows. So Arvind, you've seen research from within the university and then for a long time within industry, and you've seen how government works. Our first question is, what is the role, what should be the role, going backwards, but going forward, for universities and research for support of the nation?
Look, it's pretty fundamental. And as you think about this, I think it really goes back to what Vannevar Bush came out with post-World War II. He called it endless frontier. But the point was, there are a set of problems that, if they can be solved, can have a lot of impact for the nation. You can say, is it national security? Yes. Is it for economic growth? Yes. Is it for making people's lives better? There's a whole variety. The problem is, if those problems, really, there is no path forward, industry is going to shy away from them completely. They're not going to do it. So the only place I believe that that kind of problem can be worked on is a university environment. And we can point to so many things. You just saw some of them in the short movie that played. And I think that that is the role that academic research is in a unique place to play, because nobody else will do it. It's not that academia can't work on some other problems, but those, I think, are unique to the university system.
Thank you.
Great. So I'll just take some of a follow-up to that, just to go dig a little bit deeper. We talked a lot yesterday about this balance between fundamental and applied. So we all know this, the Pasteur quadrant, the use-inspired basic research, Bohr's quadrant, and the Edison quadrant. So how should universities position themselves to continue to focus on the foundation? So what's that balance, right? Versus we're seeing this great need and opportunity to work with industry. For example, we're working with IBM and other companies on sort of systems, scaling systems as well. And then that opens up many research opportunities as well. So what is that right balance in the basic versus applied?
Yeah, so I see a lot of my fellow students, a lot of the faculty I learned from, and both of the advisors I had when I was here. My answer is going to be probably somewhat biased on this topic. I actually believe the only place students learn the fundamental skills is at a university. So if we back off from that, then we are saying they don't need to. And that to me then is a little bit like mimicry. So you can do it, but you have no idea of how it works, where it works, etc. So I actually have the belief that you've got to learn the core fundamental skills. Then if you are using it to advance where applied is, because you need to have some sense of the boundaries, you need to have some sense of the guardrails, that is great work to do at a university. If it is just applied for the sake of applied, I, for one, am not so sure why that should happen at a university, unless it is for the sake of just making sure students kind of have some sense of what is out there in the real world. So I acknowledge that that should be there. You got to have some sense of being grounded, but that should not be where the focus is on doing the work. Look, I mean, I've said this before to a few people. We have a sense today, take the applied topic that is the topic of the day, which is artificial intelligence. And for sure, there's probably a lot of excitement, like, got to do it, it's applied. But I do think that there is a lot of thinking to be done. How far can the current set of algorithms go? Where are they going to break down? Do these scaling laws apply? Because everybody just debates them without any fundamental understanding. I do think that there's a lot to be done there. Or even at looking at a couple of the student posters, is the current power consumption that we're having, is it required? Or is there a lower limit? Okay, if there is a lower limit, can we get to it? I got it. Sometimes there's a limit, but you can't get to it. But if that limit is 100x away, then that gives an opportunity. If it's only 20% away, then maybe it's not worth it. I think these are the kinds of questions that perhaps blend the two that universities ought to focus on. If it is just purely applied, I'm sorry, but there is so much money and there is so much talent in the industrial world. I think it'll be very hard for universities to be able to effectively compete on that. Look, you can take a very simple topic that is now 50 years old. Take chip design. Universities don't go build a 200 billion transistor chip. They might work on a new design. Like if I remember, I mean, not the current is gate all around, but before that was FinFET. FinFET came out of university research. That's great because it kind of pointed to where prior designs couldn't be. But building the full chip is no longer, with respect, an endeavor that a university could do. Sorry, very long answer to your question.
That's good. It's a little bit different topic. It might be a little bit more software related, but one of the things you're known for is the acquisition of Red Hat for IBM. And my question is about open source software, and it seems like my impression is in the quantum area, IBM is also happy to collaborate, have an open source development of quantum. So I want to know what your thoughts are about open sourcing, how it helps industry or hurts industry. Same with the universities and government. Is it a good way to organize advanced technology?
Look, the reason on quantum we do open source, this is always, I think, people get stuck on. So let me take it from a very commercial, let me take it from a really parochial lens. If you think you can do all of the innovation, all of the advancement with employees within a single company, you can have the debate of should it be proprietary. If you really believe that you need help from a lot of people in the world, then you've got to be willing to share the spoils in some sense, because that means people could take what is open source and build their own instances, and you might benefit if the open source rules are strict enough, and both the Apache as well as we don't love the GPL license, but we could live with it in some cases, but certainly anything in the Apache or BSD licenses, and so that's a little bit more geeky, and I don't expect you all to know it, but there are licenses that say that if you do something that is core to it, then everybody has to still benefit. You can't make it proprietary. So in quantum, we are not open sourcing the core bottom hardware. But if you look at, I'll call it, and these analogies are not accurate, so anybody who's a quantum expert is going to grimace and shrink, I'll call it, but the equivalent of the compiler or the operating system layer. The reason we want to open source it, it allows students to work on it, it allows others to work on it. It also allows people to say, I can use it on alternate hardware technologies, not IBM's. That, by the way, is 2/3 or more of the usage. It's on alternate hardware technologies. But that means if people write more use cases on top to complete my picture of why it's good for us, now as they write those use cases, we could also benefit from it, even though they were designed for other hardware because the intermediate layer was common. So there is a belief now to say if you expand the ecosystem, will we all make progress faster together? And if that's the case, then those who have better engineering at the bottom will be one, maybe not the only, but will be one of the eventual winners. So that is kind of the reason for doing that. And I think there's a lot of modern technologies which kind of point to that is the winning strategy, as opposed to those that are completely proprietary up and down the stack fully.
Let me take the next question. So we're here at the 75th anniversary of CSL. Maybe you can also talk a little bit about your experience with CSL, and also what's your advice on what CSL should be doing for the next 75 years? A big, broad question.
So on the first two, let me just give two very quick anecdotes. And it'll play back into the fundamentals versus the applied. So I had the fortune to do coding theory, algebraic coding, for my master's. And I worked with Professor Sorvade sitting in the back there on negacyclic codes. The first problem that I worked on when I got to IBM was how do you design what is today called Wi-Fi? And in those days, you had 81 1 megahertz chunks that you were allowed to use in the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. And the question was, if you have all these devices walking around, how do you make sure they don't conflict continuously? That's a straight cyclic coding problem. And you could apply what you had learned as algebraic, because it wasn't just about symbols, you could also say, okay, each frequency is effectively a symbol, and you could come up with an optimal answer. It wasn't like it was maybe optimal, and you could not get any better. That's a straight application of what one learned there. And then another example, so that is taking fundamentals and theory straight into something that if you know what you can apply it for, it was great. You learn basis vectors as a class in linear algebra. And then you begin to think about decomposing. If you have a complex business, you can begin to apply those principles straight there. So that's just an application of the thing. So I actually call it have a broad base so that you can begin to apply those into whatever you're doing later. As I think about CSL, look, CSL has evolved even by the time I was there compared to where it started. And I think this question of being able to evolve, push the boundaries, don't be too constrained by just saying you're specialists in one area of knowledge that you did perhaps in grad school or even for the faculty in their first few years. But how do you take that and broaden it to problems that have broad scope, but in an area where there is strength? So it's not just totally random. It is trying to build on the strengths. I think that's where it ought to go. I think the need to have systems which are resilient, which are compute efficient, which can work on the problems that can make a big change to the economic growth. I'm a big believer. I think a lot of the economic growth of the last 100 years of the United States was driven at its root by technology. So if we can keep doing that, and CSL can play its role, not just by the research it does, but by the students it puts out, and of course, it's got a great reputation, so it attracts students from all over the globe, and it should keep doing that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So IBM's really big into quantum, and you're a big champion of that. And you were talking a little earlier today about the areas that might have the most need for development going forward. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit while we warm ourselves on the fire here.
So within quantum computing, look, I think that corporations are going to invest money, and at the end of the day, it'll be only 1% of what is needed. So right now, all of us who work at the fundamental qubit level will try to say, okay, I don't really want to reveal all the secrets at that level. Now, you can go, okay, but I'm going to have a small system. How do I connect system to system? How do I transmit quantum state? How much quantum state can be transmitted? How do you do it? If you get out of one cryostat, clearly the lengths are now meters, no longer micro and millimeters. What do you do there? How do you take algorithms and chunk them down? Because if you are going cryostat to cryostat, that means effectively you've got to decompose your problem, but now you don't have perfect information between these chunks. How do you do that? Is there some boundary between how much can you live with some errors? Because if your algorithms are inherently random and stochastic, could you tolerate some errors? Or do you have to make it error-proof? I think just like in computer science, you can debate, is it 30 or 50 algorithms that are the base for almost everything? What is that core? We know of 2 here. Is it going to be 10? Is it going to Shor's algorithm and Grover's algorithm? Is it going to be those 2, or is there going to be 50? And are those really better on quantum computers or not? So I just get into this whole range of these problems, Bruce, that I think are wide open for people to work on and actually are within scope and scale of smart people. They don't need to have the investment capacity of a corporation or a venture capitalist to go after. They can be done, I think, in a university setting.
Cool. You have a question?
Yeah, so again, this is a call to the information theorist and the control theorist to think about quantum algorithms.
Absolutely.
This is what this is. And we hope that we'll actually work on that, because I think that's such a great opportunity. I personally think so too, to really establish those foundations now for the big revolution to happen sometime in the future. So, is there anything you'd like to add broadly, just about the state of technology around the world, the state of, you're obviously, IBM is playing a huge role in AI and quantum. What is your thoughts on how AI, autonomy, robotics might have a big impact on jobs?
Look, I'm a contrarian on this topic. I believe that actually there'll be plenty of jobs, but the nature of jobs will change. As you look back at there's only like 7 or 8 really big technological revolutions. There aren't hundreds, but there are 7 or 8. Each time around, we ended up with more jobs than before at the beginning. I think the mistake we all make is we don't acknowledge it is painful for about 10 to 20% of the population in that transition. It's painful because we don't teach people other alternates. We don't tell people that there is a set of skills. We don't tell people that they're actually going to still be extremely useful, but you might have to learn how to do things. And then what is the policy? I'll use that word. What is the policy framework that supports them through that transition? I think that is a sort of a big, broad stroke that I have. Look, but AI one is very simple. I think that most physical work is going to get an improvement, but is not going to get replaced. That's about 60% of the U.S. working population. Okay? Now you'll say, what about the remaining 40? About 20 of that 40, you can say, whether for legal reasons or creative reasons or other reasons, is probably fairly safe. By the way, the first 60 will get a 30% improvement. This last 20 will get maybe a 50% improvement, but it's not going to get replaced. There is 20% there in my competition, which is subject to this. So I think that industries like the whole BPO, business process outsourcing industry, people who are answering phones, people who do rote clerical work, that's a lot of white-collar clerical jobs. These are all up for grabs. Now you have to say, but is there going to be enough addition in the others? So I believe in that. I'll give you a straight number from IBM. We have taken probably 15% of people out over the last 4 years in the kinds of roles I described. But our net employment has grown. Because what you say is, because if you have more money to invest, can we invest it in areas like quantum where we can make products that we think over time will win? So you can take your investment dollars and put them into areas because you're opening up an opportunity. You can put more people in sales to drive more revenue. So there are areas to put. So you have got to put them there. You can't just put them towards the bottom line because that is then saying there's a shrinking set of capabilities. So I held a very positive view, but you got to be clear-eyed that there is going to be some level of disruption from that 10 to 20% over a decade, because that time scale, humans are not really good at. By the way, at the US, that would mean 15 million people, which is a large number. And so you got to go tackle it.
Great.
I have a question. It's more of a personal question and a gee whiz. Maybe a lot of people would, wonder what it's like to be the CEO of IBM. So, I visited you maybe 20 years ago. We came to your house and saw your wife there, and you said I think it was like 9 o'clock. I'm going to stop thinking about work, and you read widely about history and psychology and all kinds of things. I don't know if you still have time to do that, but do you do something like that? And how do you keep balance, and what keeps you up at night, if anything?
So let me acknowledge that balance, that word is harder. I think there's a little bit of self-selection. You've got to be willing to be intense about it. And I can see from a few people that they recognize it. You got to be like your wiring allows you to do that. That said, mostly I still between 8 and 9 p.m. will stop work, which means I actually leave my phone on my desk downstairs, so I'm not tempted to look at email and messages, because if I will, I can't help but think about it. So that's a discipline. I find that not only is it helpful because it broadens your thinking, but it also actually helps me sleep better by reading something on a different topic than what I'm worried about all the time for about 30 minutes to an hour before going to sleep. So actually, I still do that. And it could be on history, it could be on biography, Psychology is almost like part of my job, unfortunately, I'll say. So, thinking deeply about what motivates people to do and how do you get them to do things is part of the job. I also, a thing that I've talked to you about, Bruce, a lot is communication skills. How do you communicate effectively? I think too many engineers and STEM people are wired into communication means, let me explain to people how I solved something from the first principles all the way. Nobody cares. What they care about is, why is this important? And to me, the point is, and why should I care? If people think a bit more about that, I think it's an incredible skill for all of the students who go through CSL to learn. And we got it from what used to be called, I don't think there was a bag, and it wasn't usually eating. It was called the brown bag lunches, where you were handed a paper, not on your topic you were working on, but just something, and you had to try to convey why it was relevant to the rest of your, I'll use the word office mates, but it was all the people on the floor and adjacent floors who bothered to attend. It wasn't that pleasant when you were doing it, but in the end, it was a great skill.
Great, thank you. We wanted to make sure there's time for the audience to actually ask any questions to Arvind. So this is your time. I think we have a mic that we can pass around. Anybody has a question for Arvind? Yes, Dilip.
So you're talking about the Vannevar Bush model, right? It seems to be under attack now. Do you have any thoughts what people like you in the industry could do about saving it?
I don't think my answer is going to be popular. I actually don't think it's under attack. I think that a lot of what happened is that in terms of where the funding and the politics of these topics go, it got broadened to the point where it was incredibly dilute. And so when you do that, then others who have an agenda that may not be aligned to it get an opportunity to attack it. I actually believe that if it's taken back to a core and it's taken back to you're working on really hard problems that have clear economic growth for the country, and all other policy goals are accomplished through alternate mechanisms, I think there is a lot of support for actually supporting it. And that is, by the way, not just my opinion. That is from directly talking to many of the people who are attacking it and the people who want to keep the funding there. So I think that if one accepts that that's the core mission, I think that there is a lot of support for it. I don't think that actually people believe that there should be no innovation and there shouldn't be university research. But when you attach other policy goals to it, I'm just pointing out you are leaving yourself open then for the conflict.
There's a question here.
Madhav.
Hey, do you have any suggestions for how education should evolve in the age of AI? Because everybody uses it routinely, right? How to stop the brain rot? This is something that keeps me up at night.
So with full disclosure, Madhav and I were effectively classmates for almost 10 years, through our undergraduate and our graduate. Look, I'll begin with, when I was going into college and the debate was, should calculators be allowed or not? Okay? I'm like, oh my God, these kids won't know how to do math. I mean, like their brains will rot because they can't do arithmetic and multiplication tables. Okay, like none of that happened. Then it was around using computers. Then when Google came out, people said, no, it's going to be a tool that this thing, okay, great. It's so much better to sit in your room and find something than go to the library. So I actually believe that the system of education has to change slightly. So if it is rote problems, which is easy to plug into one of the reasonably capable LLMs and get an answer, then clearly, I mean, people are going to do that for assignments, for sure. If it's an at-home test, no doubt people will do it. And I think they'll get clever enough that they can slightly modify it so you can't even tell that it is coming, which means you're back to there has to be a bit more of a Socratic system where you have to be able to assess people. There is a bit more verbal. It's easy for me to imagine it in grad school. It's a little bit tougher to imagine it at the undergraduate level. But I think you're all very clever people. You'll think about how could you do that so that maybe they can get a little bit of help, but they can't just effectively have an LLM do it. Because unless it's extremely hard, you're not going to be able to have something that an LLM can't answer. I mean, that's just the reality. So I think you've got to say, how do you make sure? The point of an assignment to me is not a grade. The point of an assignment is to make sure you've learned some material. And then the point of something else is just to assess, do you know enough? So I think it gets back to the assessment question, because then I think students who are driven will say, okay, if that's going to be the assessment, I got to learn enough to do well on it. And I actually think that that is the way it's got to get redesigned a little bit. But that is a lot of work. People don't like changing what has worked for the last 50 years.
Good question. Yes.
So I have a question related to bringing these things together in the future in manufacturing. So, as we talk about quantum systems, right, there's cryogenics, there's the qubits, there's all the accoutrements and everything else. It's hard to imagine what a manufacturing environment looks like to even create that. And I admit I'm thinking of Arthur C. Clarke's HAL plant in Urbana, but what do you see as a future of how we create a really complicated environment for that kind of challenge?
Yeah. So let's acknowledge it is a little bit different than most of what is done today, because most of what is done today, let's just make it very simple. Chips are made in a semiconductor plant. You have a packaging plant or OSAT on the side. Now out comes a semiconductor. You put it on a PCB. Now you have a system. PCBs are put together using essentially mostly copper wiring. Okay, this is not going to work quite so simply for quantum computing, at least not for the first decade. After that, it's hard to predict. There is still a semiconductor piece at the bottom. There is still a piece of packaging. Unfortunately, we have gone backwards right now, where now you need waveguides, and now you need microwaves, and you need to be able to pass analog energy up and down. I know we spend a lot of energy talking about cryostats. I actually think in the end, that's a mechanical engineering precision machining problem. The actual cryogenics is actually not that hard, as long as we have enough helium in the world, which given the Middle East could be a problem, but you don't need that much because these systems don't really lose the helium. They can keep it. So it comes down to now having the skills to do all that. And right now, those are a lot of manual skills combined with the systems. As we scale up, I do think that robotics and machines will come in to do a lot of that manual skill, but it will be an additional, let's call it additional packaging skill or an additional OSAT of some type to keep these systems up and running. Because the volumes are not there, nobody's investing in that yet, but that's going to be one of the things we're going to need by the turn of the decade, roughly.
Thank you. There's one more question. Yes, please.
Yeah, last one.
In case you want to share, you don't have to answer this question, but I was curious, what are some of the skills, behaviors, and strategies you used to help you get to the top of the corporate ladder?
We got to record this one.
Look,
You don't have to answer.
A skill that I probably did not think was important till about 10 years ago was how do you get various stakeholders of different types to want to align with what and where you want to go. The way I was educated, the way probably my brain is wired, I'm probably always think that, logic prevails. If you explain something and there should be a logical answer, logic will prevail. And that turns out to be as far from the reality as possible once you have any kind of scale. My guess is even the university administrators recognize that. So then you have to get into why would these people want to align with that goal? It can never be about you, but how does it align with where they want to go? Back to my psychology point. So I learned a lot to think about stakeholder management and to convince people that a particular direction, because you can say, okay, even in my role, I can say, okay, on paper you have control. You don't. Because when you walk out, they're going to still do what they want to do, unless they really are aligned towards your end objective.
Thank you. Okay, one last question. Deming.
This is also a little bit of a personal question, but I'm asking on behalf of the students in the audience, right? So you graduate from ECE, right, and join industry and start to change the world. Have you run into a moment you were thinking, gosh, how come Bruce never told me this? And yeah, do you mind? Yeah.
I don't know whether that's a question for me or for Bruce. Look, when I came to grad school, my belief was it's impossible to be educated on every topic that you're going to need. I actually really believed that is actually responsibility is mine, not the faculty's. I've got to learn how to learn. And I think that is really fundamental. And the best classes I took, it was clear that if you took it from that lens, yes, there was material they were giving you. Yes, they were going to assess you. But it was much more about learning how to think and learning how to learn. And that is the biggest skill I think that I walked away with. And I do think that the best faculty were very good at pushing you on how to think. And that is something that then helps you throughout. It doesn't matter. You can actually, I think, translate that from field to field and across different endeavors.
So at least he gave you the freedom to think.
I think he would have been remarkably punitive if one had not learned that.
Okay, Tamir is raising his hand. One last question for Tamir. Yes.
Related to the answer that you have given to the previous question, there is an active research project that we are doing called Bayesian persuasion, which means that how can you persuade others to behave the way and to arrive at decisions the way you want them to be without them feeling that there is imposition on them. So
using randomness
this
also.
is an active sort of research area.
Excellent. Good. Well, let's thank Arvind for being here. Big round of applause. Arvind, thank you for being here. Thank you very much for being here and for doing everything you're doing for the world. Arvind is going to stay with us for the afternoon. He's actually on a panel. He'll probably go off, do a few things, and then you will hopefully have some more time to interact with him. So thank you again, Arvind. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arvind.
I can take that one. Just use that one there.
Our next speaker, it's my pleasure and my honor to introduce Sunil Kumar. Sunil Kumar was a student at CSL from 1992 to 1996, so he overlapped with Arvind, or just came right after Arvind left. Following getting an MS in Indian Institute of Science, and completing his third year as the 14th president of Tufts University. His PhD advisor was P.R. Kumar, who's sitting here, and his research focused on stochastic control and scheduling. Following his PhD, he made the bold decision to jump from the engineering to business school, joining Stanford School of Business, and he was there from 1996 to 2011. It's getting more and more common for us to see our graduates going into business school, but at the time it was pretty surprising to us. We were kind of all shocked. And then you went there and you said, okay, I'm not going to do anything for a year. I'm just going to learn how to talk to these people over in the business school. Then I think you became an associate head or something, got a little bit of administration, and then you ended up being the dean of Chicago Booth School of Business, 2011 to 2016. Then he was a provost at Johns Hopkins, 2016 to 2023, where he was also a professor of applied mathematics. Then he became a professor of electrical and computer engineering, again, at Tufts, where he's the president. He has a strong record of research in engineering. He's particularly well known for his research on heavy traffic analysis of open processing networks, including asymptotic optimality of discrete review systems. He's not going to talk about that today. He'll be speaking on decision and control, and the humanities. Sunil.
Thank you, Bruce. I do want to let those, oh, sorry, I don't need this anymore. Yeah, I'm good. So I do want to let those who came for Arvind's talk to leave. If you know, this will pale in comparison. And I'm a little bit intimidated because most of my PhD thesis committee is here. And Kumar, of course, was my advisor. Bruce was on the committee. One of my committee members has passed away. Sean was here earlier. And Bill is here, who was on my committee too. And so I want to start by thanking the CSL. I owe a great debt of gratitude to CSL. I'll say a little bit about my experience here, but it's, I was here for 5% of CSL's life, and therefore I'm out to, passing flea, and so it would not be worthy of mention. But CSL transformed my life. So those 4 years transformed my life. To Mr. Krishna's point, taught me how to think, and taught me a kind of boldness. When I did go to business school, I assumed I'd get fired in 2 years, but I'd get fired in Palo Alto, so how bad would that be? I'd figure something out. And I ended up staying there a long time. And so I want to apologize, having thanked you all. My talk does not fit any of the formats you've seen before. Like I said, my time at CSL was not worthy of mention, not because of all the great things that were going on at the time. It's just that my work was pedestrian by comparison. Nor is my own work, again, it checked all the boxes, but it's not something I'd wasted somebody's afternoon with. So I'd like to talk about something, to quote Monty Python, now for something completely different. So I want to talk about the humanities, and you're probably rolling your eyes saying, there goes the university president again saying all the colleges should work nicely together, and you're going to get a formulaic recitation of the value of interdisciplinarity and so on. Nope, I'm not interested in any of that either. Rather, I'm hoping I can change half a mind here, which is, I don't believe you can take the modeling paradigm in socioeconomic systems. So I was very gratified yesterday to hear the interim head say that this has been identified as a future direction. Socioeconomic systems is a future direction for CSL, and decision and control in particular. Well, if you're going to do that, I don't think you can live entirely within the mathematical framework and actually be reasonably certain about the answers you're providing the world on issues of incredible importance. The inverted pendulum and getting someone to do their job are not the same thing. The laws of physics don't exist for the latter, as you heard from, I couldn't ask for a better endorsement than the CEO of IBM, who told you all that people are not always rational. And so I want to kind of walk you through how to perhaps you could step out of the paradigm and make your math stronger. And this is not to avoid doing the math, but to make it more somehow stronger. And I don't have a fully formed answer to this, but I feel quite strongly that the hubris of, well, I can reduce that to the paradigm I've already worked on for the last X years is a mistake. I honestly believe that, and I mean this with the greatest humility. I'm not a good enough researcher to change the paradigm, but there may be people in this room who can. So with that, let's talk details. So let me move a little bit on my time in CSL. It was really an exciting time. Many of people, Shrikant and I were on the same softball team. We had a very, very incredible record. We never won a game. We, in particular, I remember my time with the agriculture school. The slaughter rule was invoked after 2 outs on the other side. So we couldn't even get an inning in before they called the game for us. So, but it was a family. I mean, we did things together, and I was one of the generation that moved from the ESB to what I still think of as the new CSL building. And that was good because people have forgotten. In the old ESB, the material science guys set off the fire alarm every February. And when it was 10 below, everybody had to come out of the building and wait outside till the fire trucks went in. And this was a huge improvement not to have to go out in February. On a more serious note, we were treated as adults in the new building. Graduate students sat with the faculty. Your door opened onto your faculty member's door. You ran into them all the time. And people took you seriously. If I'd given this talk when I was 22 or 24 years old, people would have taken me somewhat seriously, I think. In fact, as university president, I'm not sure whether they take me less or more seriously now. It never felt like work. We worked very hard, but it never felt like work. And I mean this honestly. And of course, I made lifelong friends. In fact, somebody who was in the next office to me, Ravikant and his wife, now live about a few miles away from us. And we got together to watch what we thought would be a historic Final Four game, except that it was kind of didn't work out. I do want to leave you with one thing about how informal things were. Today, if one of my faculty members did this, they would get a stern letter from my provost. But in those days, my advisor used to smoke. And he liked to work in the mornings, and I liked to work at night. So the only equilibrium we could work out was, as soon as Murphy's Pub opened, he would come in. I would join him there. We would discuss my paper. He would smoke his cigarette. I would get a beer, usually at his expense. I'd go home and sleep, and he would go back to work. And it worked out. We had, so it was. I was somewhat disappointed to see that Murphy's has cleaned up its act and is no longer as seedy as it used to be. So when I was there, the boundary between, and I'll start in economics before I wander off to humanities because I don't want it to be too sudden a transition and give you heartburn. So economics had already become porous. One generation earlier, people had moved into solving problems in economics using the techniques of decision and control. So I got trained in this. Tamer was one of the leaders in this, but the others as well. And so that did not feel like a big transition. And in fact, I had a hammer, optimal control, dynamical systems, stochastic control, and the world looked like it was full of nails. And I remember one of the senior OR people, Izzat Shahin. I met him in Ankara, in Bilkent. There was a conference, and he said, "You guys ECE guys are intellectual colonialists." And he meant something by that. He was seriously upset that people were coming in from ECE into every field, and I think he was a little envious and were making contributions. And but that said, this attitude, this hubris was extremely helpful to me. This is why I took the job, because I thought, I'd figure it out. And I want to talk about a nail. Given that I had a hammer, this was one of the first nails I encountered. This is a paper by two people, Bengt Holmström, Paul Milgram. They are quantitative microeconomists and high practitioners of the art. They're as good as they get, basically. This is not a schlocky paper. And the paper starts with actually a slightly longer quote from Huckleberry Finn. For those of you who have actually read literature and so on at some depth, this is a deeply troubling text, by the way. This is not exactly an easy text to put in a class. And let me read the words. "Well then, says I, what's the use you learning to do right when it's troublesome to do right and ain't no trouble to do wrong, and the wages is just the same? I was stuck." This is Huck Finn talking. I was stuck. I couldn't answer that. So I reckoned I wouldn't bother no more about it, but after this, always do whichever comes handiest at the time. I deliberately deleted another line which is at the beginning of this, and I'll put it back in because that will, let's say for dramatic effect for now. This is a classical problem called the moral hazard problem in economics. Microeconomics, it exists for a long time. There's a principle, in this case, the person who pays Huck Finn's wages, and the principal benefits from the actions of a second person called the agent, but the outcomes are random. They don't observe the actions, they observe the outcomes. And the agent bears the cost of the action, so that's where he says it's trouble to do right and not less trouble to do wrong, and they pay me the same. So the agent wants to minimize the cost of carrying out the action, and is compensated for this by the principal. That's the wage, right? So prima facie, you can make this connection between that passage and this model, but I'll get to all the potential pitfalls of doing that. Now, I do want to flash some math here, but this is not for aesthetic reasons. I want to walk through the model, right? I take you too seriously to just not do that. The first equation on top, the easiest way to read this, is that's what the principal is going to make. It's she wants to maximize an expected value of, and the V there is so-called utility function. It translates the outcomes into some benefit for the principal. So of all the payoffs over a periods 1 through t, payoffs are pi t, minus whatever is the settlement they make at the end, which is paying the wages for all the actions. That is S of capital X of t. Think of capital X of t as the entire history over the t periods. Okay? So the idea is every period the agent's acting, that action gives you a payoff. At the end of the day, you look at all the outcomes, because you don't observe actions, you observe outcomes. You look at the history of outcomes, and you've written a contract that says, if these were the outcomes, this is how much I have to pay you, and you pay that person. That's the first thing. The second equation is, forget u of 0. Take that as 0 for now. On the left-hand side is the agent's problem. They want to do two things. One is, the game should be worth at least playing, which means that the utility, U, that can be different from the principal's utility, of whatever payoff they got at the end of the game from the agent, from the principal, that's S of capital X of t, minus the sum of the costs of taking the actions, P, that produce the outcomes theta. And the expectations is basically over theta. Okay, so, and what is P? The easiest way to think of it, according to Holmstrom and Milgram, and this is, of course, any good modeler, is simply the action is simply picking the probability distribution over a finite number of outcomes labeled theta here. So the agent picks the probability distribution, a random outcome occurs, you keep track of that in your X, and settle up at the end. The last one just says it maximizes that. The reason these two are written is the first one is called incentive compatibility, second one's called individual rationality, but we won't worry about it. Just think about the second one. Any questions on the model? Okay, here's the first set of assumptions. So this is where I want to say you have to step out of the modeling paradigm. This model is underspecified, I haven't specified U, V, independence, time variation, all of those things. First, they assume the thetas in each period are independent of each other. That's straightforward. The second one they assume, and this is starting to make you feel slightly dubious, is that U and V are exponential. Now, there's an economic justification for this. It's called constant absolute risk aversion. But justification aside, you know why that would be a good thing. When you wrote down the Bellman equation, the past would simply fall out as a multiple. right? Whatever's happened up to now would simply multiply what will come later because it's exponential, so it would have a nice additive structure that would break the problem apart. So that's, right? So that's for tractability, but it's already dubious. And then there's a third assumption that says the vectors P, the probability distributions that the agents can take, span the entire space. The interior is not empty. Under those conditions, the problem breaks up into basically single period problems. It just decomposes into single period problems. In each period, you pay, if this was the only period, you pay, your S is whatever would have maximized the best P for the principal at that point in time. And you take that, and capital A, which I have not defined, is simply the number of times, it's an accounting thing which keeps track of number of times, say A3 is the number of times outcome theta 3 occurred. So it's accounting. You're just aggregating the number of times outcome 3 occurred. To that, you have a constant that you multiply. And so it's a nice linear rule, which based on aggregate outcomes that you get. What is the advantage of this? It's a very simple rule. It's a very simple rule. It's linear, and it simply keeps track of very simple accounting rule that keeps track of how many times an outcome occurred. That's why this paper has been cited, I think, 15,000 times in the literature. It's very rare for people to realize which one of the three assumptions is really causing this problem, or this simple structure of outcome. Any guesses? I'm looking at Bruce. He always could figure stuff out faster than everybody else in the room. Any guesses? Which one of the three? Independence, exponential, or that P span has empty interior, the span of P has empty interior? You need all of them, but the third one is the one that causes it. You're giving the agent so much power. They can control the entire probability distribution of their outcomes that that person basically says, every time I get an outcome, you got to pay me for it. That's not as well understood. Even though this is quite, so where am I going with this? There is a false sense of rigor in saying, the interior of P is empty, is just a technical assumption that makes my analysis. No, it is not. It actually has real-world impact. And if you took that out and said, the only thing the agent can do is to pick a mean of a predetermined one-parameter distribution, you would get a completely different policy. So for example, if you were comparing two normal distributions, the optimal policy, which has been known since the 70s, is pay a constant wage but penalize them for bad outcomes because the mean must have shifted if you got a bad outcome. So you have serious economic impact on real people on the basis of some set's interior not being empty. That is what I want to warn when you think of, well, this just fits in my paradigm. You have to stop and ask, what prescription am I giving? And how does that fit in with the rest of the world, right? And so then we can ask the question, and so this we've already talked about, so I'll skip this. And then we can say, how do we make this more real? Well, there is a standard assumption. I will take away exponential, and I'll put, the first thing is called constant absolute risk aversion. Second one is hyperbolic absolute risk aversion. That is so tractable, and so on. And then people compute the crap out of it, right? And of course, the solution is no longer as simple as you thought it was. It's never going to be as simple as the ones Beck and Paul came up with. It's always going to be much clunkier. And at some point, and the other thing we could do, which is what people do today, is why don't we let two AI agents just play this out and let's see what the hell they come up with. And the answer there is, you don't know what the hell they settled on. And in fact, yesterday in one of the talks, people pointed out from industry that these things get stuck on local stuff. So you have no idea whether they actually computed an equilibrium or not. And of course, we can go and ask, if we were really interested in Huck Finn, we could have asked LLM, what should Huck Finn do? Here's the moral problem there. The line I took out was Huck Finn debating whether he wants to turn in Jim or not. If you don't know what that means, look it up. It's whether you want to turn in an escaped enslaved person or not. There are deep moral implications to saying that which side is the right desired outcome. There are deep moral implications to this. So there are many ways in which you can now start to ask the question, what does more real mean? The simplest and the most preachy of the lot is, well, what is the moral implication of this and so on, but I won't bother you with this. So the ethics, morality, there's enough of it, there's philosophical literature, etc. I want to actually wander down a different rabbit hole for the remainder of my talk. And the different rabbit hole is, if somebody gave me this under a set of assumptions as the answer to the principal agent problem, some rule, how would I know it's the answer? What would I apply? And if you look at the economics literature, for many people, this set of equations in economics is a black box. They're not trained to, for me, writing down the Bellman equation is trivial, but they're not trained to do that. So the title of this paper is not, we solved Bellman equation and did this. The title of this paper is Aggregation and Linearity. That's what they took away from this. There are two things about this solution that made the economists who saw this as a black box accept it. One was the aesthetics of it. The linearity is an aesthetically pleasing concept. It's not a highly complicated function. It actually breaks down. The second is aggregation. It actually makes sense that the number of times you get an outcome should be proportional to the payout in some sense. And so there is something about reasonableness and common sense that goes into this. And then there's something about aesthetics and beauty that goes into it. These cannot be solved within a mathematical paradigm. You have to step out of it. And if you're feeling uncomfortable right now, that's a good thing, right? For that, the humanities have been looking at messy questions where there aren't clean answers for a long time. So I want to go back to how do we make this more real and go to the obvious next step, which is the history of the Catholic Church. No, not obvious? So if somebody gave you the answer to the fastening problem, that is, it's not a nail that you knew and you had a hammer that you didn't bang away, and they said, here's a solution to a fastening problem, and asked the inverse question, what fastening problem have you solved? How would you get at it? You can't do it from within the model. Because maybe you can say it doesn't solve this problem because it doesn't meet the first-order conditions. Sure. But what problem has it solved? So given this, now I'm starting to wander off. It's from what was up to now hopefully a coherent talk into perhaps less coherent but may hopefully entertaining talk. We can look at an approach 500 years ago at the cusp of another technological revolution, and I'll explain the picture in just a little bit. Any guesses on the technological revolution 500 years ago? The printing press. The printing press was, we went from having about 100,000 books worldwide to over 100 million in 50 years. And one of the casualties of that was the Catholic Church. Hence the connection. It was, in fact, one of the most immediate and direct social consequences of that. This picture depicts something that is supposed to have happened in the early 4th century, 303 BC or so, 303 CE. This is called the donation of Constantine. The donation of Constantine shows, I don't know if you can see it, but there is a, let me see if I can get, there is Pope Sylvester, who's supposed to have cured Constantine, who was the first Christian emperor, of leprosy. And because of that, Constantine wrote a document where he says, I will let you have all of Western Europe. So it has some consequence. This document claims that all of Western Europe belonged to the Catholic Church. And so this donation of Constantine was used as a way to establish the secular power of the Catholic Church. And there's a book, there was a guy called Lorenzo Valla who went after this in around 1490 or so. And Lorenzo was there are some members of Congress who are like this today. I know this is being recorded. It actually is good to take an instant dislike to them because it saves time. And Waller was this way. Everybody hated him. And he more or less hated everybody. And Waller hated the Pope. Therefore, he decided he was going to go back to the source document and verify the authenticity of the donation of Constantine. There's a beautiful rendition of this. This is a book by one of my friends. One of the advantages of being a provost of a major university is you make friends across fields. Chris Celenza is a medievalist and a Renaissance scholar. He's written many books on the Italian Renaissance. He's extremely well written. I'll have more to say about the cover itself, which is a masterpiece by Ghirlandaio. And he tells the story of Waller. Waller destroyed the donation of Constantine. And he destroyed it on basically the same grounds we talked about. First order conditions not being met, aesthetics being off, and not making common sense. And it's written differently. I'm following the argument in Chris Celenza's book. Here's the first trip up of talk about first order condition not being met. He uses the word Constantinople. What's wrong with that? Constantine hadn't yet gone to Byzantium because the thing is done in Rome, and so the word Constantinople couldn't have existed. Constantinople was still known as Byzantium. The second one is, so the proof starts to get weaker as you go down. The second one is there are no coins with the Pope's head on it from that period, but, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, so already the logical arguments are starting to fray. There are strong logical arguments here that he used words that did not exist and explains words that people in Rome would have known. They didn't need explanation, like the word diadem. Diadem doesn't mean what it means today. In those days, it meant a cloth with a gem on it. And so those things are more of the technical, still in the first order condition. But then there is a stylistic one. He doesn't believe it because it's so poorly written. This is a direct quote from him. Oh, holy Jesus, will you not respond from the whirlwind at this man who's rolling out sentences without any command of his language? Right? Talk about a referee report. My God, this is But the aesthetics is part of the solution. But here's the real punchline, right? Constantine had heirs. Giving away the known world in those days would have meant Constantine would have had his head cut off by his sons. And so the idea that it failed the common sense test. And we've seen multiple times today about AI needing common sense, et cetera. But I actually think modelers are not exempt from that. We have to step back and apply all these three rules to ourselves as well. And how to do it is not clear, so I'll talk a little bit about method, and then I'll turn to answering your questions. In particular, this is a graph that shows the European output of printed books. 15th century is too small to show on the scale. 16th century is about 200 million, and it keeps going up. And so given that suddenly people realized they were reading stuff, they had no idea who had written it, whether it was true or not. They all claimed to solve problems. They had no idea of evaluating the solutions. And so a cottage industry developed. And this guy was the first academics to superstar that at least Chris identified. This is not my work, it's Chris's work. His name is Poliziano, and it's the same root as that wonderful Italian red, Montepulciano. It's the same word root. And Poliziano was a professor at the University of Florence and was a friend of Lorenzo de' Medici. And in University of Florence, the Uffizi della Studio, which is this board of trustees, actually set the salaries for the faculty members, and he was the best paid faculty member. Moreover, he was one of the few who had academic freedom. He was allowed to lecture on anything he wanted. And when he was 19 years old, he uncorrupted a book of poems written by a late Roman poet, Catullus. in a printed edition. Printing press had been around for 7 years. And he did this by simply looking at the aesthetics and style, saying the poem could not have been this way, it must have been some other way, etc. And basically what it got to was a collection of scholars, when they, because of the printing press, could read more, they started building their instincts on what is reasonable and what is not. In fact, when the first critical editions of Homer arrived, they corrected Homer from within Homer. That is, other parts of Homer didn't say things that way, so they wouldn't have said it that way here, etc., and so on. And so this is an example, and this became a textbook. Finally, he wrote a text on this with a method. It's now called the Lachman method. In this field of humanities, by the way, is known as philology, the study of texts. And I have a feeling that the Lachman method, which I don't fully understand, and will eventually work on it, will help us in kind of applying the common sense test to models. And the Lachman method basically allows critics to essentially reconstruct what they think the correction should be. And it consists of us cutting out what shouldn't be there and then replacing based on where else in the text things could be done. And that leads to an obvious idea, which is if AI creates the problem, maybe AI creates the solution, which is they can read millions of texts and do aesthetic kind of assessment, maybe. Or maybe humans have to do it. And the problem with common sense has been repeatedly brought in. But that judgment thing has to be done. And so where would I like to stop? I think if you had to, and this is, by the way, a model that exists in learning models. It's called actor-critic. John Tsitsiklis, for example, wrote a bunch of papers on this. And what I'm saying is we need a softer version of that. For every actor who acts, you need a critic who's looking at the common sense and the aesthetic values of the answer that's coming out. Now, how exactly to do it? Well, I'm at the stage in my career where I get to tell young people to, well, knock yourself out. I'm sure you'll figure it out. So, but as a place where we've always asked the deep questions, I feel we have a moral obligation not to shirk this. Can we guarantee common sense outcomes from whatever automated modeling or non-modeling solutions we propose, especially if you're going to do socioeconomic problem? You don't want your solution to Huck Finn to be, let's turn in gym, right? And so on that note, let me stop, and thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Can you have two agents, two AI agents? One is answering the question that you asked, and the other one is checking the validity of the answer.
That's what I'm hoping could be done. I'm not so sure about the validity checking part of the story, because it's not the same as a safety check in a car, right? Here, you're stepping completely outside the paradigm as a whole to ask, are the assumptions of the paradigm reasonable? And is the solution either aesthetically acceptable or acceptable from a common sense perspective? It's not clear to me it's doable, but that must be the way you should go. You need to build the critic, right? You need to build the critic. At least that's how I think about it. Well, now, I admittedly, my understanding of this is somewhat superficial. So
I mean, the critic could be an AI agent.
Indeed. There's nothing that stops you from doing that. Yeah. That's right.
And one other question. This is going back to the Milgram model.
Right.
There is one implicit assumption there that the maximization is unique of the agent.
That's correct. There's a compact next assumption, right?
And so if the agent picks one which is not the most favorable one for the principal, then you may run into, I mean, we have several examples where that can be shown.
Indeed.
So it's kind of a Stackelberg game with non-unique response by the agent or by the follower.
Indeed. It's those assumptions are not easy to relax. right? There is a uniqueness assumption on both sides. It's buried in the both by assuming some compactness assumptions, but you're exactly right. So thank you.
I guess no more questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Yeah.
Then I'll just go bug
They can sit, right? Yeah.
What's the order?
I'm assuming we can put Gary on one side, so maybe
Dave
you're
is last?
third. Yes, you're third. Yeah, so it's 45 megawatts, 300 megawatts. The building and the reactor. I asked them all of it. There's a state or
Actually, electric effect, do you buy anything from the grid right now? What's your annual bill?
So I need the numbers.
You get a 45 megawatt run continuously. Wholesale is usually around 4 cents, I think, a kilowatt hour. So that's 45,000 kilowatts times 4 cents. So divide by 25. $1,000 an hour? No, $2,000 an hour.
Gary, thank you for coming to this.
Good to meet you.
Mix it up. So do you think if Dave and I switch places, you'd...
But yeah, I know where you're going with that. It will actually help with the lowering the cost itself, right?
My map, if it is fully used, it's the thing in here.
So it's going to save fun. That's not true, but 4 years ago, we were in a call, and we made the case in 30 years, we're going to get the cost back. So, all right, okay.
Oh, very good. Very good, thanks. I got a little one myself earlier. It's not Japan. Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon. It is truly my honor to serve as the moderator for the final panel at the CSL 75th celebration, where we'll be discussing, as you can see, CSL's role in research and education over the years. As we've heard over the past 2 days, CSL has grown from a group of just 2 researchers into one of the nation's, or I should say one of the world's, preeminent research institutions, sitting at the intersection of engineering, computer science, and physical and social sciences even. Its work has led to discoveries and technologies we all rely on, and it has embodied a perspective on academic discipline and rigor that has trained generations of researchers and innovators. Our panelists today represent the full arc of that story as scholars, educators, and as both academic and industry leaders who truly exemplify the impact CSL has had in the past few decades. So allow me first to introduce our distinguished panel members, many of whom I'm sure you know and are aware of, but we'll go through some introductions, and then, as opposed to the previous panels, we won't start with prepared talks by the panelists. We'll all start with a couple questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience to ask some questions. Okay, so first, Gary Eden. Gary's career has been deeply intertwined with the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He received his PhD here in electrical engineering in 1976, and then joined the U.S. Naval Research Lab as a National Research Council postdoc research associate. During his time at NRL, he made foundational contributions to visible and ultraviolet lasers and laser spectroscopy. He returned to Illinois in 1979 and pursued research in atomic, molecular, and ultrafast laser spectroscopy, the development of ultraviolet lasers in lamps, and the science and technology of microcavity plasma devices. At CSL, his lab has produced work with wide-ranging applications. He's also co-founded 2 companies, Eden Park Illumination and EP Purification. And in these companies, he commercialized much of the research that he developed here at Illinois. Through his research and industry activities, he's been awarded over 80 patents. And as a sampling of some of his honors, he is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and he's a fellow of the IEEE, the Optical Society of America, the American Physical Society, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And he's also served here at UIUC in a number of administrative roles. Kent Fuchs' roots run deep also at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He earned both his MS and his PhD in ECE from UIC, and following his doctorate, he served as a professor in the ECE department, and of course in CSL, for 11 years from 1985 to 1996, during which time he established a stellar reputation in the area of dependable computing. His research is largely focused on computer engineering, particularly dependable computing and failure diagnosis of integrated circuits. From 1996 to 2002, he was the head of the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Purdue University, and then he moved to Cornell, where he was first the dean of the College of Engineering, and then he became provost at Cornell. In 2015, he moved to the University of Florida, where he was president until 2023, although then he served as an interim president for another year following that, finishing up just this past August. He's a fellow of the IEEE, the ACM, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Arvind Krishna, of course, we saw his Fireside chat earlier today, so I'll review his background as well, even though I'm sure we're all familiar. He's one of the most prominent alumni to emerge from the Coordinated Science Lab. So he took his graduate training here and moved to, from one of the top EC departments in the US, and he moved to the top role at one of the world's top technology companies, where he's now chairman and CEO at IBM. He completed his PhD here in '91, supervised by Bruce, of course, and joined IBM immediately thereafter, and he's been there for over 3 decades now, clearly very successfully rising to the top. At IBM, he's made scientific contributions across wireless networking, security systems and databases. He's founded IBM's security software business and helped create the world's first commercial wireless system. He's led the building and expansion of new markets for IBM in artificial intelligence, cloud, quantum computing, and blockchain, and he was a driving force behind IBM's acquisition of Red Hat back in 2019. He was appointed IBM's CEO in 2020, but his ties to UIUC have remained strong. For example, as CEO of IBM, he has championed the IBM Illinois Discovery Accelerator Institute. Dave Munson, his career exemplifies the iconic path from academic research to university leadership that few of us are actually able to complete. His academic career began at the University of Illinois in 1979, where he started as an assistant professor of ECE and remained for 24 years. During his time at UIUC, he was affiliated with both the Coordinated Science Lab and Beckman Institute. His research concentrated on computational imaging with applications including computer tomography, synthetic aperture radar, radio astronomy, and radar imaging. In the early 2000s, he co-founded InstaRecon, I hope I said that right, with Yoram Bresler, a company that commercializes fast image reconstruction algorithms for tomographic images. He then moved to the University of Michigan, where he chaired the EECS department, before then serving as the dean of the College of Engineering at the University of Michigan, and he was there until 2016. After that, he became the 10th president of the Rochester Institute of Technology, retiring in 2025 to be succeeded again by one of our own. He is a fellow of the IEEE, and he's received the IEEE Signal Processing Society Norbert Wiener Award, and he served as past president of the IEEE Signal Processing Society, which Mark Spong commented earlier to me about how many of us here at CSL are associated with presidencies in our research societies, so it's always nice to know the connections. Okay, so as I said, to start the discussion, rather than having the panelists give prepared talks, we're going to jump right into the questions. So I'm going to sit down and I'll start with a couple of questions, and then we'll, as I said, open up the floor. So I think the panels before have gone in alphabetical order or something, so why don't we reverse it? We'll go in reverse our alphabetical order to start the question, okay? So as we all agree, and we have been agreeing for the last 2 days, CSL has played a major role in contributing to research globally and in shaping education, at least locally, over the past 75 years. So what are one or two contributions in either research or in education from CSL that have stood out to you? So, Dave?
Okay, let me start, but I think I do have to give at least some history, since that's part of the purpose of this symposium. Tim Trick mentioned that he was actually the one that got Illinois started in digital signal processing. He went up to Chicago and took some courses from Jim Kaiser, who was one of the early pioneers. And then Tim mentioned he hired Ken Jenkins. Ken was kind of a real signal processor, more full-time, and Ken arrived in 1977. And then Ken was the one that essentially hired me. Ken let it slip that my application for a faculty position had been just sitting around in the department chair's office and nobody had noticed, and he noticed. And he had seen me present a paper or two at conferences, including the Allerton conference that preceding fall. And so now we are up to 3. And then we hired, some years later, Yoram Bresler, Doug Jones, and some people that haven't received any mention at the workshop. After that was Mike Orchard. He was with us for a number of years. Mike was just great, collaborated with everybody, and Kannan Ramchandran. Mike ended up at some point leaving and moving to Princeton, and then Rice, and Kannan moved to Berkeley. But we had those guys for a number of years. And Pierre Moulin, and I see Marie Pierre sitting in the audience. Just an incredible group. And when I started in the signal processing world in my own graduate studies, so this is back in the late 1970s, DSP was a brand new thing. And the kinds of computing we did was fixed point computations, 8-bit registers. Analog to digital converters were really slow. And you couldn't do a lot, but you could do a little bit, and you knew that technology was going to move forward. The first textbooks in digital signal processing, the real textbooks, started in 1975, and so the whole field, it really has evolved since that time. I should also mention there was another side of the signal processing group which has received some mention, and Tom Huang arrived at Illinois in 1980, moved over from Purdue. Narendra Ahuja had joined me the same year here at Illinois with Bruce Hajek, with Gary Eden. We were all 1979ers, I think. But at any rate, there was a heavy emphasis from about 1980 forward on image processing and computer vision. Once again, computers were so slow, it was miserable to try to do simulations. We had a special purpose computer that some of us and our students could use that was in that old CSL building. I don't know, it wouldn't hold a candle to a modern day cell phone, you know, it was in terms of computing power. Another person I'll mention who hasn't, his name hasn't come up, is a visiting researcher who was with us for multiple years. His name was George Sanz. George was Argentinian. He was a mathematician, and anybody that interacted with George, man, he was a research machine, and he was just awesome to work with. Several of us worked with George. His name should have been pronounced Jorge. I asked George, why do you ask everybody to pronounce your name George? The answer was so that everybody will mispronounce my name the same way. So, but anyway, he ended up, and Arvind may be interested in this, he ended up moving to IBM Almaden and then becoming quite high level at IBM in Argentina. But George played a big role. As to research contributions, in the early days, there wasn't any signal processing group because we kind of grew out of the circuits group. And as I mentioned, Tim Trick really got DSP going. So Ken Jenkins actually was still doing some work in circuits as well as some signal processing work using some unconventional kinds of electronics, CCDs and so forth. I came along, and originally my research was mostly in effects of finite register length, as if anybody would even care about that today, you know, when you got 32-bit registers and everything's floating point. But it was a big deal back then. How could you perform computations and try to minimize the error at the output of that digital filter, et cetera? And Yoram came in. He was an imaging guy doing great work in things related to medical imaging, and a host of best paper awards there. And then I really won't carry forward too much further. Doug Jones came, and Doug was the first guy that was more of an well, he shouldn't say he was more of, but he was an experimentalist in addition to doing theory. And that was kind of a healthy addition, I think, to the group. I still remember Doug and I were spending a lot of time with Bill Hunsinger. He had this special ACT device, acoustic charge transport, massive funding from DARPA. Bill was going to take over the signal processing world. But I still remember the day Doug and I walked in, and Doug, instead of carrying a backpack, he actually had a briefcase. He looked sort of very, a lot like an engineering nerd. Bless you, Doug. And Doug opens his suitcase and starts pulling things out on the table and pretty much proved to Bill within about 15 minutes that his whole business was going down the tubes because analog to digital converters, the speeds on those things were coming up at a certain rate, register lengths were growing and what have you, and there just wasn't going to be a place for Bill's device. That was kind of ego-deflating. I felt badly. I really wanted this stuff to go, but Doug was a guy who was just really into the hardware in addition to theory. So anyway, later on, lots of other notables joined us. Some of them are in the audience. Min Do, Jipei Liang. Min was an expert on wavelets. Jipei was doing MRI with Paul Lauterbur, the Nobel Prize winner. Farzad Kamalabadi joined us doing imaging in the upper atmosphere. And I'll mention Dick Blayhut. Dick was our former department head of ECE, but Dick was a colleague and a joint research colleague with a whole lot of us. And Dick really bridged the communications group and the signal processing group, and we did a lot of great things together. But I'll quit there because we could go on, and I could talk a lot of details, but then nobody else gets to talk, and we wouldn't get to some other important things.
And thank you. Yep. And you mentioned a lot of results. Were there, as we asked at the start, I guess one or two that really stood out that you wanted to go back?
Well, see, this gets me into trouble because
okay.
It was in my time here. I felt we were the top signal processing group in the entire world, and I still believe that today. And a lot of folks had notable contributions and major league citations. So that I don't offend my colleagues, I'll just mention one thing that I did, but I won't say too much about it. Vince Poor mentioned something about tomographic models for synthetic aperture radar, and I worked on that with Ken Jenkins. And I was visiting a particular Air Force facility that I won't name, and they were, that night, were imaging Russian satellites, and the objective was to determine what type of satellite it is. And satellites are actually spun to stabilize them, and so if you bounce radar pulses off them, you can see them from different angles. And that night I asked, well, whose algorithm you're using? And they said, oh, we're using your algorithm. And I thought, oh, okay, so that's cool. And then there was a group at Sandia National Labs that worked with all the three-letter agencies doing surveillance from space, using radars mounted on satellites. And I won't go into the details of what these radars can do, but boy, oh boy, can the bad guys ever be seen. And they built all their work off of things that I had done. So.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, thank you. Arvind, a couple things, maybe 5 that stood out to you.
So I'm going to be less of a historian, but I want to call out some of the things that were done in CSL that probably don't get a lot of credit, but were remarkably effective. The first one that comes to mind, because it may not have been the origin, but a lot of progress in the world of spread spectrum communication was done at CSL. If you think about Mike Persley, who's not been mentioned, you mentioned Vince Poor, but also both the students who are here, Dilip Sarvade, who's here, and his students. And the reason I mentioned spread spectrum communication is people may not realize it, but all that we leverage today on mobile phones, which have become ubiquitous globally, not just here, couldn't happen without all of that work on how to not just make it work, but also how to make it efficient, how to leverage the bandwidth to the most extent. And all of those techniques, it kind of shows how the body of work, but how a small number of very smart people have the dedication to get the work to a place where it could be leveraged by everybody. And the early signs of that were happening probably circa 1990, that you could actually leverage it in a very commercial sense. So that is one body of work that I'll point out. A second piece of work I'll point out is some work that was done by Bruce, and this probably lies much more in the theory realm, albeit it has a lot of practical implications. I remember when I was looking at graduate schools, the papers on Aloha and the papers on Ethernet were just being written. This was in the early 80s. And there were all kinds of questions. Are these systems going to be stable? Are they just going to go on? Do they ever converge? Do they ever get somewhere? And that was work also that was done, in this case, by Bruce. And that led to a whole body of work around what kind of systems can converge or do not converge. And that then gave rise to practical, where then I would say by the early 90s, people weren't even questioning it. They just assumed that, okay, if you have these kinds of randomized algorithms, they will work in practice, and they've been in play now for 40 years, and they're still going on. So as you look at the balance of those two, just like DSPs, because since Dave mentioned DSPs, I remember in college, I think we were amongst the first set. We were the 1980s starting who actually got to study DSPs and play around with them. And I remember those textbooks still because there was only one. It wasn't like there were multiple of them in those days. And that's actually the marriage. Spread spectrum and mobile communication wouldn't happen without the marriage of those two techniques. All the work done to advance communication, and then can you actually do DSP in an efficient way? And I think that kind of shows the magic of CSL, and then all of that then carrying over to high-speed networks and all of the randomized algorithms there that made them progress. So I think those are the two pieces of work that I would actually call out as having made a huge impact in the world.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Kent?
So my perspective is from the computer systems area, and then secondly, someone that was both a graduate student in CSL and also a faculty member, so a total of 17 years at the University of Illinois. And all of the first year was as a TA in the EE department, and then the other 16 were here in CSL. So when I was looking for grad schools, possibility of going to grad school in electrical engineering, I was looking for a place where, and thinking now in the 1970s, where I could build computer systems. And this, even at the time when CSL was being founded, was known for building computer systems. At that point, it was primarily in the physics department with the beginnings of the ILLIAC and the many generations of the ILLIAC that came forward. One of the truly unique aspects of, I'll say, the university, I'll say the College of Engineering, and particularly CSL, has been how there's been this sustained multiple generation after generation after generation of excellence. People way before any of us were in roles that we had here. There were people just doing incredible things, as we've heard, back in the 40s and the 50s and probably before that. So this was a place that I knew about, even as an undergrad that built things. And I knew about Plato, and which ran on the ILLIAC when it began. So I showed up in the department, and I was given a TA position for the senior design lab. Now, which was not wise on the perspective of the department chair at the time, because I had been in divinity school and seminary for many years and forgotten all my engineering. But I was in charge of senior design lab as a TA, and so learned a lot that first year. But one of the things that was critical in my development and in my life was that first semester in the fall of 1979. And again, my interest was in finding an advisor where I could build something. There was a young faculty member running down the hall of Everett Lab. His TA was following him. He had a whiteboard that he was carrying, because none of the classrooms had anything but chalk. And he had green and red and blue and black colored markers, and a whole large stack of Mead and Conway Introduction to VLSI Systems preprints, 1979. And this is the time when the state-of-the-art Moore's Law was just beginning to manifest itself. In the early 70s, if you could have 100 transistors on an integrated circuit, that was great. 1979, the 8088 state-of-the-art first microprocessor in a PC had 29,000 transistors. And here was, as I learned later, a class where you could learn how to, as a computer person, design integrated circuits by putting green and red and blue rectangles together with some black to interconnect things. And I just fell in love with it. That person was Jacob Abraham, the young faculty member at that time. So I adopted him as my advisor. And fortunately, he and Ed Davidson in the next year received a large VSIC grant, very high-speed integrated circuits grant, of which I was brought in as a faculty, not as a faculty member, as a grad student. Guri Sohi, who was here, joined also as part of the VSIC program as a fellow grad student, and has gone on to do incredible things at the University of Wisconsin. That was my background. So when I think of the contributions and research contributions of CSL, in some sense it's the boundaries between CSL, not just within CSL, but between CSL and departments and the rest of the university are truly porous and dynamic. And things like building computer systems, and now which is translated into all kinds of other areas of building, and what used to be called the Computer Systems Group, has just continued. So that sustained excellence, that sustained momentum, is almost impossible from an administrator's perspective to create and to build over many, many generations of faculty and leaders and grad students. But that's what I observed, and that's what I've seen, that the University of Illinois, and particularly CSL, is known for doing foundational work, and then having that work really demonstrated in excellence. And in the computer systems group, it was by building things, compilers, integrated circuits, all kinds of things.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, Gary.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's my pleasure to be up here at this desk with these very distinguished colleagues. I'd like to, for the next couple of minutes, take my comments in a slightly different direction, and that is in the direction of what one might call, we used to call electrophysics or applied physics. It's come to be known as photonics, material science, and electronic devices. And in that area, CSL has a very distinguished history, as we've already heard about so many other different areas. I came to the University of Illinois in January of 1972 as a 21-year-old, and I'd been offered an RA in the department, working in a laboratory at that time was called Gaseous Electronics Laboratory. And I was quickly exposed to what turned out to be one of the greatest accomplishments, I think, in the history of CSL. When early in 1972, I can't remember the exact date, my research advisor sent me on a sort of a gopher mission over to CSL in the building that we now call Engineering Sciences. The corner of Springfield and Goodwin, to the laboratory of Don Bitzer. And I was not aware of Don Bitzer's work at that time, but when I wandered into the room, and I can't remember the errand I had been sent on, but it was to retrieve something, the walls were filled with red arrays of lights. And Don Bitzer, of course, is the person who, along with H. Gene Slotto, who developed the first alphanumeric display based on pixelation. The first display came to be known as, in the form of a terminal called the Plato system. But I remember being dazzled in that first, here I was just a youngster coming into the building, and his display was based on an ingenious adaptation of gas discharge technology. What they had succeeded in doing, Gene and Don, is making very high-resolution displays, even by today's standards, by taking micro neon discharges. Remember the old neon signs? We still see them a lot to this day. It says, "Eat at Joe's, eat at Joe's." But miniaturizing them and learning, going through the very difficult material science aspects of making them not quite microscopic. They were on the order of a millimeter or two in diameter. But learning how to interface the electronics with this. My friends, this was the beginning of the high-resolution electronic displays that we all know. The first offshoot of their technology would be the plasma TVs that. Am I coming through? I'm getting various levels of feedback. The plasma TVs that were so popular for. Oh, I'm too close. Thank you. Sorry, I started as a youngster as a ham radio operator, and you had to put your mouth right up at the microphone, and I've never been able to get away from that habit. Thank you. Is it okay now? All right. So their work led directly to that of plasma TVs, and was really the forerunner of the very high resolution displays we can all get at Sam's Club and Lowe's and so forth that involve LEDs and also LEDs. That was a wonderful experience to me in graduate school. I was able to have a number of contacts with them because, as I later found out, there was a lot of collaboration going on between Don and Gene's group and the laboratory in which I was fortunate to be. It was known at that time as the Gaseous Electronics Laboratory. Gene, of course, and Don went on to receive many honors for this work, and those of you in this auditorium may be unaware that they actually won an Academy Award because of their contributions to the first full-color plasma displays, a marvelous achievement. And to give you a sense of, my experience over the last boy, I'm sorry to say this, 50 years with people in CSL and even on a larger scale in engineering, in the College of Engineering here at Illinois. The spirit, the culture that I have prized for so long is really illustrated well. I can't remember how I came to have this conversation with Gene Slotto, who was an amazing engineer. And I was telling him that for my PhD, I had graphs that I had obtained experimental data, and they were, normal graphs, going up and down and so forth, and that I couldn't find a good way to determine the relative area under the curve, and that, of course, that was well before we had the personal computers we have today. And Gene introduced me to something that I suspect no one's ever heard of, something called a polar planimeter. And if you look it up in Google, you'll find it's an ingenious instrument that's based on a mathematical equation, and it allows you it gives you a readout of you take a stylus and move it around the curve. So one point is held fixed, and you move the other around a curve. And after Gene explained that to me, he said, "You know what? I happen to have one of those, and you're welcome to take it." And I was speechless, absolutely speechless, that he would loan that to me. And it turned out to be a major point in getting my thesis done. But it's a spirit of collaboration that I have seen for many years that I prize. So that has to be one of the two. I'll quickly mention the second. When I came back to Illinois in 1979 as a faculty member, I was quickly ushered into a program sponsored by the Department of Defense known as the Joint Services Electronics Program, which we affectionately referred to as JSEP. And again, I was stunned because I was green as grass, and yet the senior faculty pulled me into this program, which was a funding program, multi-year funding program that addressed all of the areas in photonics, optics, electronic devices, and it involved all of the stars from Illinois. Nick Holoniak was doing his legendary work in LEDs, Greg Stillman. But the person I ended up working most with, and I'm sorry he's not here today, many of you knew him, his name is Joe Green. Joe was one of the finest scientists I've ever known, and he sort of took me under his wing, and we started doing the earliest experiments in using ultraviolet light to drive photochemistry for depositing films of semiconductors, dielectrics, and so forth. And these techniques are now in use widespread in industry, and I think we'll see more of it in the future. Joe became a member of the National Academy of Engineering, as did Don Bitzer, but I know that these comments are small, but in some way reflect the camaraderie that several of my colleagues up here have mentioned. I cannot express to you how much that's meant to me in my career. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So following up on, in particular, something Ken said and sort of bringing education into the discussion a little bit more, what do you think it is that happens in CSL, or I guess a place like CSL, there aren't a lot of places like CSL, that really facilitates so much excellent research and education, and in particular, in ways that are harder to achieve, say, simply within a traditional department structure? I mean, we've talked about culture and collaboration and camaraderie, but I mean, I think in a department we can have collaboration, and so is there anything that you think you can point to within CSL that really facilitates sort of the excellence we've seen in research and education? So, Dave.
I'll mention a couple of things, but I'll take a little detour. I should have mentioned Andy Singer's name earlier. He's obviously been part of the program earlier, and so I failed to do that. But Andy also was a major collaborator with pretty much everybody and crossed over between communications and signal processing, which was great. Regarding education, actually, I think we ought to also acknowledge the departments that we're all from. You know, it's not just all CSL, right? And in ECE, a name I'd like to bring up was we had, you know, terrific department heads, and I see Tim and Steve Kong sitting there side by side. And prior to Tim, it was George Swenson. Prior to George Swenson, it was Ed Jordan in electromagnetics. But anyway, the way in which each department hands out teaching assignments and decide who's going to do what, I think is really important, because we need to provide quality teaching and at the same time have enough time for our faculty to do research. And there is a big tension there. And the name I want to bring up in ECE was the long-serving associate head, Narayana Rao. Narayana Rao was awesome. And during the years I knew him, which was a very long period, I don't know that he was doing any research. But man, oh man, was he ever setting up the system so that the rest of us could. And one thing Narayana would do is, if you were capable of teaching large classes and doing well by the students, he'd let you do that. And that would help lighten the teaching load. And there were areas that were more theoretical, like the areas I worked in, where we didn't have as much research money to buy out our salary as some of our colleagues maybe in more experimental areas or other places. But the fact that Narayana was really just valuing outcomes and contributions that we could each make to the educational mission, I think kind of evened the playing field and really enabled the theoretical side of the house, so to speak, to really have enough time to do significant research. And then in terms of what CSL offers, or offered, at least when I was here, I liked the fact that my students were not just in an office with Dave Munson's students. They were with other students, and they knew the other students. And we've already heard so much over the last 2 days about the approachability of the faculty and all the great courses our graduate students took, and how much our former grad students still remember those professors. And all of that was all in one place. And I think increasingly over the years, it didn't happen quite as much in signal processing, but in decision and control for sure. Boy, it's this mix of faculty from all these different departments. And for students to be exposed to that, I think is just really awesome. And that can't happen in just a single department.
Okay, thanks. So I think you really brought out like what you see as the sort of mixing that CSL creates, but also I think you said your department sort of also facilitated your being able to participate in that. Yeah, so that's interesting.
Yeah, and I'll add just one more thought. I still remember my first semester teaching, and you know, I fashioned myself as I'm going to be this great teacher. And at the end of the semester, my teaching ratings were average, and I thought, I've never been average at anything in my life. Gosh, this is so hard. And what I learned very quickly was my colleagues were taking teaching very seriously, and I was going to have to up my game. And that's what I found at Illinois. We did right by our students and still had a system that we organized in a way that allowed us to do a lot of cutting-edge research.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Arvind, I don't know if there's anything you want to add about.
I'm going to certainly actually build a little bit on what Dave talked about. I think there's three sort of intertwined circles which helped, and in my case from the student perspective, not the faculty perspective. One, electrical engineering clearly had a high expectation that you were going to learn a lot, you were going to learn deep, and you had to have enough breadth, not just in what you were intending to sort of specialize in for your thesis. I think the AA qualifiers were broad, and I think, I don't know how much they've changed, but they definitely forced you to do a lot. But then within that, you could imagine somebody could print a sheet and say, go do this if you're in this area. But I remember every semester you sat down and discussed with your advisors in detail about what that would be. And yes, there is some that you have to do because it builds to go later. But then what else do you want to do? So that was one intersection that was going on. Then the second one, Dave mentioned, when you had your office mates who weren't always from the same exact area. I mean, Galen is sitting here, Tim Weller was here before that. We were in the same office, but working on very different things. So you kind of learned from there, and then you were encouraged, okay, maybe you want to learn a bit more about it. Mm-hmm. The third comes after qualifiers, because when I talk to friends who were in other majors, many people for the last 2 to 3 years kind of hunkered down in their exact thesis and did nothing. And we were highly encouraged. Look, you ought to have enough time and enough interest. Why would you not want to go take things in other areas? And that was sort of the third broadening that was happening, all of which is sort of simpatico with what Dave mentioned, but the environment there let you do that because you could sort of see there were people doing and building computer systems. There were people who were doing math work. There were people who were playing around with material science. There were people doing VLSI design. So it kind of allowed you to learn those things. And I think that gives rise to a breadth that is often very hard to do unless you kind of sort of change fields or change majors. And I do think that that is something which as students we experience deeply.
Sitting next to people, actually, yeah. Mm-hmm. Thanks, yeah. Kent.
Yeah, I think one of the aspects that's unique here at the University of Illinois compared to many other universities where I've either interviewed or worked in different roles is the ability to not just have an organization like CSL, which is just spectacular, as we've all talked about the last 2 days, but secondly, having departments within the College of Engineering that are also permeable, at least based on my experience of 17 years. And it was quite different when I was in 1984 out interviewing at different places, and then also in 1996 when I became the head of electrical and computer engineering at Purdue. I was a faculty member here in electrical and computer engineering, but half of my 22 PhD students were computer science PhD students. And I went to Purdue, and Purdue's wonderful. This is not to be negative about Purdue. Some of our famous faculty got their PhDs there. But none of the faculty were, none of the large department were supervising grad students from physics, from computer science, or other areas. And we would not allow, as a department, any of those physics professors to supervise our grad students. So I made it my mission to change that, and I hope that change is still there. Because it's really important that in my mind, for a place like CSL to be successful, that it not only has to have these permeable barriers between the different areas as we have, or groups, also between the departments. And even I would bring that up to the college level. And I found that here, and I have not found that as much as any of the other 3 universities where I've worked or other places where I've interviewed, that I could supervise PhD students fairly easily and have an appointment, no matter what you want to call it, in another department, and which just by its nature then spawns interdisciplinary work if you can do that.
Yeah, thanks. Gary?
I'd like to second a number of the comments that have been made, especially those made by Kent. I think that the way that CSL was originally established shows the genius of not only the early directors, but every director that CSL has had, and foremost, those are our recent director, Clara. That in the name itself, the Coordinated Science Laboratory is again something that we've been talking about here, but the idea of having individuals from different disciplines co-located in close proximity really is a visionary thing to have done, because it really runs against a natural instinct that we as academics often have, and that is to associate primarily with those who have the same training, background, and interests. Earlier in my comments, I mentioned Professor Joe Green, and I failed to say that he was a professor in material science and engineering, and I would have never met Joe had it not been for JSEP and CSL, but he had a profound influence on my life and career. And I only mention him for the sake of time, but there were a number of other individuals in that program from very different disciplines. And what Kent described about working with students from different departments, I've had the pleasure of doing that in virtually all departments in the College of Engineering, and my situation is not isolated at all. From bioengineering to I've even had a PhD in environmental engineering. But again, I'm not at all alone. All of my colleagues are involved every day in the coordinated science that CSL represents. And that's the reason that I believe that CSL has been really the forerunner for the pattern that we now see in other places, such as the Beckman Institute, close to us. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll ask at this point if there are any questions in the audience. Okay, we have.
Thank you. I'm Michael Louie, and I have a question at the intersection of research and education about undergraduate research. So for context, I want to say that when I joined the faculty here in CSL and ECE in 1981, we were not allowed to teach courses in the old building because it was a research facility, and that kind of education was not allowed. Nevertheless, as we know, and others have alluded to, a lot of education, the intersection between research and education comes through the graduate students' thesis and dissertation research, and then postdoctoral education as well. But undergraduates are an important part of the research enterprise as well. Of course, we all supervise individual projects by undergraduates, but I'm interested in the role of the institution, and particularly CSL, in supporting undergraduate research, which has been identified as a high-impact practice in undergraduate education. In the spirit of full disclosure, I should say that for 4 years, summers, I directed an NSF research experience for undergraduate site, and I must acknowledge Masuda Bashir, who is a co-PI on that grant and really did all the work. I just showed up once in a while and had free lunches. But so the bottom line question is, how should CSL institutionally support undergraduate research?
Michael, I can say a couple of things, but I'm not sure it'll answer your question. Especially in my later years, I was very involved in serving as an advisor to undergrads in their research. Would typically have 10 students per year, something like that. I can warn the faculty that if you do that, you're asked to write an awful lot of recommendation letters for graduate school. Yeah, one year I remember writing letters for 20 different students. So obviously there are NSF programs to support undergrad research. I suppose that CSL as an organization could encourage faculty to get more involved in bringing in the REU programs and what have you. But I didn't find any impediments at all to supporting undergrads in research. For me, it was a joy, and I generally did not have them work on my own research programs, which were pretty theoretical, and typically the students didn't have enough math background to do what my grad students were doing. But instead, and maybe this was selfish on my part, if there were things that I wanted to learn about, I would talk with students about some different opportunities for them to do something. And I remember in the earliest days of neural nets, I wanted to know a lot more about neural nets. I had a senior do a phenomenal project in neural nets, and I learned a whole lot really fast. And so I would take that approach, and I always felt like I got as much out of it as the students did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I don't know if anyone else wants to mention anything. I think undergraduate research programs are a growing thing in the College of Engineering. We get a lot of email from the undergrad office, and some of the departments have REU programs. I don't know. Did anyone else want to talk about undergrad research? Or
I think the value of undergrads in just the research enterprise, we've all come to appreciate that a lot more over time. Some were early adopters, but for some of us it was later. And I've used the model of having my senior research graduate students also be supervisors on a basis. And you don't always get the return on the investment, but sometimes it's spectacular. And I've had some of my, quote, really productive grad students starting out as undergrads in the research lab.
Yeah, that's true.
Carolyn, I'll just mention that I just want to reinforce what Dave and Kent just said, that undergraduates have been a major part of my laboratory, and again, not mine alone, really since the beginning. One of the major sources of undergraduates I've found over the years, Michael, is students in most engineering departments are required to do a senior project. And they're looking for somebody to advise them. So we've had scores of undergraduates over the years come through the doors, and I and my colleagues have guided these groups. And this is often a wonderful way to find stellar grad students, because when they start working in the lab, they go, "Oh, I didn't know that this was being done at the university," and you end up with some of the best people I've ever had.
Good. I don't know if anyone wants to make any follow-on comments, or if there are another question. Okay, Mark.
Well, I was going to maybe change direction a little bit from but if you will indulge me, instead of a question, I'd like to maybe relate an experience and make a comment, because something that Kent said really struck me about faculty in one department not allowing faculty to advise PhD students in another department. We have the same problem at my university, and we're trying to change that. But my own experience, my faculty appointment here was in general engineering, which was a fine, really great undergraduate program, but they did not have a PhD program when I came. And so I had to get PhD students from ECE. And so my appointment, I could not have survived without my appointment in CSL and my access to EE students. And what's remarkable, And I sincerely thank the ECE department, because I was not one of their faculty, but I could walk in to the department office and go through the file cabinet and make offers to graduate students. I would show up at the meeting when they discussed the results of the PhD qualifying exam, and probably, but it was in violation of the bylaws even for me to be there, right? But they let me participate, they let me vote, and it was just completely transparent. And I think that it's remarkable, and I sincerely thank you. I think that the EC department is the finest department at the University of Illinois. I really do. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I don't know if people want to comment on that.
Mark, the dean took a note when you said that. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark.
There are a lot of hands.
I think there were a lot of people, Mark, that didn't know which department you were in.
Exactly. I feel like I should say something really good about ISE right now. Go ahead.
So I had a comment about undergraduate education and research. So I did my undergrad at EC here starting 2011, and I did my master's here as well. And now I'm new faculty. And what I've seen is there's been a tremendous change in how undergraduate research is perceived. When I came in 2011, the landscape was very different. And if you were EC Illinois or CS Illinois, you basically had your choice of internships and your choice of jobs after graduation. Mm-hmm. And when I was doing it, as starting from freshman onwards, you went on to Microsoft or Google or wherever, immediate, internships, and generally you were block hired as an undergrad after graduation. So when I did my senior research project with Andy Singer, if doing senior research was kind of the exception rather than the norm, everybody did senior design, and you were basically going on into grad school or something like that. Now the landscape has dramatically shifted, and there's hardly any internships to be had, even if you're a top student in a top university. Mm-hmm. And it's become extremely competitive. So everybody is now doing senior research as a way to distinguish themselves. Just getting onto a conference or journal paper as an undergraduate is almost a necessity in order to get a good internship, even let alone a good job.
Mm-hmm. Right. Are there some questions back here?
So if I can just make a couple of comments. I think all of this is very relevant in terms of research and education and the integration. So one thing that we have done here, and certainly in the last, I think, 10 years or so, where the policies are such that it doesn't matter for a faculty member like where you run your grants from across campus. Mm-hmm. Your academic unit where your tenure is gets the same proportion back. So really what we want everyone to do is intellectually align themselves wherever they need to go, IGB to NCSA to CSL. And intellectually, wherever it makes sense, you should really collaborate people there, and don't worry about sort of, the department heads or the deans worrying about the financial piece of it. We've actually, the campus takes a smaller cut and gives more back to the lab, and the college takes a smaller cut and gives it more back to the lab and the department head. So that's something, a policy change that's happened in the last 10 years that I think has further made it easier for faculty to collaborate. Mm-hmm. Undergraduate research, I think, is really important, especially given the impending shortage of workforce and impending shortage potentially of graduate students as well. So I do think we need to figure out how to incentivize that, how to support that. Those are hard the NSF REUs are hard to get if they are in any one discipline. They usually are easier if they're cross-discipline. The one that Michael Louis also mentioned were cross psychology and engineering. So within like 2 or 3 engineering disciplines, NSF doesn't see that as multidisciplinary enough. So we do need to figure out how to support sort of this research at the undergrad level. But I think it is important, given kind of how we want more of our own undergraduates here, whether it's American citizens or foreign students that are coming in, but to potentially stay for graduate school. I think it's really important. Mm-hmm. And the last comment I'll make is that I think this is all academics certainly would know this, and the audience, and I think Arvind knows this also very well, but we have actually encouraged IRUs now, which like CSL is an interdisciplinary research unit, to actually think about educational programs and hosting them as long as it's not in competition with the department, but rather cuts across multiple departments. So for example, the Masters for Autonomy that we have here is anchored in CSL actually. And so the idea that if truly a program cuts across multiple departments, and if it makes sense that those grad students, masters or PhD or others are mostly in that unit, this is a recent change. We said, let's allow for that, because I think we should drive things in terms of what really is right for scholarship and for what's best for the students, and then figure out the structures afterwards, so to speak, and really not let structures stop us from that. So we have now, at least, I think, a couple of other masters as well that are not anchored in an academic unit anymore, but they partner. All the courses are still from the academic unit. So these are, I think, important nuances to worry about, but then we need to lower all barriers, especially in new areas. So quantum, right? We're now starting actually a minor in quantum. We think that's the way to promote undergraduate research and undergraduate engagement in that. Semiconductors is a minor here as well. So I think thinking through and really new models of integrating research and education is just really important. And maybe that's what I would, I guess, ask the panel to think through about what would be the most radical idea there, and what are the really pushing the boundaries, but still keeping the rigor and the depth in any particular domain. It's really important. But then figuring out how do we, sort of push in these new disciplines that are emerging, how do you permeate them down enough at the undergrad level that makes sense?
Can I make a comment back on the internship issue that is happening across the country? First, it's quite real, but it's really important to understand why. Otherwise, you can't go ahead and solve it. If you look at it between 2019 and 2023, a lot of tech companies essentially doubled their regular employee headcount. Mm-hmm. It turned out it was very obvious that was almost double of what they needed. Mm-hmm. And then when investors began to question where is your profitability, where is your growth compared to headcount, because it may surprise you, but investors look at actually headcount and, okay, if you have doubled, did you double? And when that answer was no, then all of them are cutting down. Now they're being short-sighted. So 24, 25, 26, when they're cutting regulars, they're also saying, well, if I'm cutting, I can't afford to, I don't want the optics of having interns. That's not all, but unfortunately that is the majority. What this is going to cause is 4, 5, 6 years from now, they're going to lack people because they're not taking interns, which means most likely they're not hiring fresh graduates, which means 5 years from now they're going to have a problem of a vacuum of skilled people. So at least as one, I don't think we are the only, because I've talked to enough of my peers, we're not the only, but we are in the minority. We said, why don't we use the opportunity to double down on our interns for 26 and likely 27, 28, 29. We'll take 3,000 interns as a single company. Certainly at schools which we know well, and I see when we're sitting here, we probably had 50 joint appointments at your graduate student level when you were running. It wasn't called Discovery in those days, but something else. So we would bring in students and even try to maintain a relationship when the formal summer was over. I think you'll find there are companies like that. And to me, very parochially, why do I want 3,000 interns? As opposed to having a 1-day or a 2-hour interview, you're effectively doing a 3-month selection process. I actually don't really care whether the work they do in the summer is that useful or not, but you get a really good sense of the personality, their desire to do work, their desire to work with their peers, and you do get a sense of their skills because a lot of people are pretty good at demanding some work from them during that time. I do think that you'll find companies where you can lean in, but I do think that certainly because all those ones you mentioned are on the West Coast, I think sort of if you go SF to Seattle, right now they're feeling like they got too many people. It's very quickly going to kind of boomerang on them because you need new skills, and it's far easier to get fresh graduates to work on new areas.
And Carolyn, I can just mention a couple of other things. I don't know if Illinois has adopted this program called VIP, Vertically Integrated Projects. This is an initiative. It's currently centered at Georgia Tech. Anyway, this program was hatched at Purdue many years ago, and one or more of the faculty, one was Leah Jamison, who was Dean of Engineering at the time, who worked on this, became members of the National Academy for this. At any rate, in a vertically integrated project, you form a team of undergrads, master's students, PhD students, and there's a whole scheme involved. Ed Coyle, for many years, has been in charge of this. He's headed it up, and he moved from Purdue to Georgia Tech. But I know that when I was at Michigan, we adopted that, had a lot of VIP programs, RIT, a whole lot of VIP programs. So that's another way to involve undergrads in research with a whole team of upper level, even grad students. And then regarding internships, one thing I should mention is there are schools that still exist in the world that are so-called co-op schools. RIT is one of those where most of the graduates actually spend a whole year working in industry as part of their degree program. And at RIT, they work with about 2,000 different companies. And yeah, that absolutely gives the student an edge. 80% of the students at RIT receive an offer from one of their companies they co-opt with. And although I agree with Arvind, things are going to take a turn. You know, things are looking bleak for a while, and now we'll get to a point where there's not enough talent available.
I hope so. I think we have.
All right. So let me ask you, where do you think the future of research and education in CSL is going to go in the area? So, you know, just some observations that my colleagues at Wisconsin and others have had in the last few months. A couple of my colleagues believe that with using AI tools, they don't need graduate students anymore, let alone undergraduate students. The interactions of students with TAs has plummeted.
Yes.
Calling to question the need for TAs. So this is happening. And what impact do you think? Just, you know, what are your thoughts on how research and education 5 years from now in CSL is going to be carried out, or in any other organization like that, given what's happening? And it's not only about the internships and so on like that. There are fundamental changes that are coming.
I thought with AI we could get rid of the administrators, not this.
Now you can never get rid of administrators. So you can only increase the number of administrators.
Probably so. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe following on that, I mean, do you think that there's something sort of central to CSL that, you know, we need to think about going forward in terms of research and education, our mission, how we do things, that will need to change with AI and et cetera? Quantum computing and everything else that's coming down the road? I don't know. Yep.
Yeah, this is an age-old question, isn't it? We every generation we rethink this question, and I don't consider myself an expert in the history of technology, just maybe a wannabe. But I think from what little I know, history is clear in this, that none of us sitting here today is going to be able to predict what is going to be important 5 years from now. But that brings me back to the very structure of the laboratory, and I'd really like to commend the faculty, the students, the directors of CSL over the years, because they have stuck to an idea that I think in the long run is the only winning one, and that is get the best people that you can find of all different disciplines, bring them together so that there's that fertilization, that intellectual fertilization, and out of that is where the ideas that will lead in the future will come. I believe firmly in that. It's not just a statement, but many wonderful people who preceded me and now are following me believe the same way. And I think that's the way to go.
Can I make a short comment back? Yeah. I think that people are forgetting the fundamental mission. If what you're describing turns out to be the case, places like this and others will cease to exist. It's not a research lab. It's a university. That's the primary mission. If I read the definition, I believe the role is to educate people. I don't know how you educate people if there are no students. Everything else kind of surrounds that, adds to that, aids that mission. And I think that one should never lose sight of the fundamental mission. At the state level, I've seen some states where they begin to attack if you don't have enough undergraduate students from the state, if it's a public university. And the second one, if you look at then research, where the goal is to get grad students out. Of course, in order to do that, you have to have great research done and great work done and a great lab. I really think it's important to not lose sight of those fundamental missions.
Arvind, could I tag on to that question, because I was going to ask you specifically, in a time where federal research funding that drives much of what we're talking about here is down, in our case here at the college, tens of millions just this past year, what conversations have been happening in the C-suite level in corporate America where you're depending on pipelines of students like yourself who have gone on and moved up with PhDs, but it's that federal funding that's been drying up that has fueled that and paid for that?
Look, I'll be honest. Outside of the pharma industry, I'm not sure that this is a huge topic in most C-suites. A few of us who come from these backgrounds are worried. Part of that is the reason why we leaned in and said explicitly we will get more interns, because that at least provides a path for students. But our numbers will help a few top places. I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, it'll help 10, 20, 30 schools. It's not going to go help the vast majority. Where we are useful is by quietly, and it's not just the White House. You have to actually get to the Senate. You have to get to Congress. And all of you can do that with your local senators and congressmen to also tell them to push on those funding, because in the end that comes back and benefits their states. Those statements are quite powerful. Right now we're going through a year or two of a bit of a hiatus there. But I do believe that for NSF, DARPA, those kind of fundings are going to come back. Maybe not at the full level, but at 80%. And this is not going to be kind to the country. I actually think the top 100 schools at the end will be more or less all right. The problem is that the ones after that are going to find themselves, unfortunately, completely starved. Is 100, 200, or 70? I don't know. But I think what you call sort of the R1 university, in the end, I think will come out fine. It's the rest which will not. And that's a tough pill to swallow.
I think we had a question in the back, and then Wenmei, and then maybe Molly.
Yeah, so my question is, it seems like when you were here, or for Professor Gary, you're still here, you had a really good time here at Illinois. And you've gone and do amazing work. But one thing that I keep thinking is that you don't become great by just going with the flow of the river. So what were some of the challenging moments that you encountered here at Illinois, and how did that help you become the person that you are today? In any case, that helped out.
I'm off the hook.
Did you address it to a specific person, the question, or?
I think anybody that was a student here.
Oh, okay.
Who was it?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I'll be glad to share my problems. Yep. So I had everyone has their personal stories, but it is being a graduate student anywhere is challenging. It really is.
It's supposed to be.
Yep. As long as you survive. And it was for me particularly. I mean, getting through the ECE qualifying exam was horrifying. And then, for another 12 years I administered it, but it was,
somebody's got to pay.
Yeah. And,
May?
it used to be, I'm sure it's different now, but we would divide up the large number of grad students taking the qualifying exam into, thirds, and top third passed, middle third we argued about, and the bottom third did not pass. My suspicion, I don't know for sure, but my suspicion is I was probably near the bottom third in taking my qualifying exam. So but what I always knew here is that the faculty, not just my advisor Jacob, but the faculty in my area, the faculty in CSL and in the department wanted you to be successful, and they were going to push you as hard as they could, hopefully without breaking you, and that was great experience for me in terms of the rest of my career as a faculty member and then as an academic leader in different places. So that was just learning to be persistent, patient in some way, but being persistent. I didn't have to be at the top of the class. If I took coding theory from an unnamed person in the department or other things, but I could just by persistence and then discovering the joys of research later on in my career and presenting papers at conferences. One thing I wanted to mention that was so important in my own development was the lack of hierarchy, not just between faculty, the most senior, famous faculty, and us junior faculty when I started, but also between the grad students and the faculty. So in our area, which when I was a grad student for a number of years, it was called the Computer Systems Group, and there was pizza every week that we would organize as grad students, but the faculty were always there. Grace, so he was one of the organizers of that. And so the faculty were always there together with us eating the pizza. We had a weekly seminar every week, and we would try as young grad students to ask the most difficult questions we could of whoever was presenting. And it was just learned so much by doing that. And there wasn't we obviously knew, I'm speaking now as a role as a grad student, we knew who the professors were and that they controlled our future, but there wasn't a hierarchy. We felt like they were colleagues, and they treated us that way. That was just so important in my development and the development of the group. So that I just wanted to mention that this. It wasn't that we were like best friends and hung out afterwards. I mean, we fought and argued and did everything else, but we were colleagues and wanted the best for each other. Yeah.
I'll give you a personally very challenging situation. So, doing my PhD and coming here as an immigrant, I had my heart set on becoming a faculty member. And about a year before graduating, Bruce kind of very gently said, I think you should look at industrial research labs. When you hear that, the first thing was, does he think I'm not good enough to be a faculty member? And I would tell you bluntly, while it may have hurt then, that was probably the best piece of advice I ever got, because I looked hard at industrial research labs, and I think being in industry was the right thing for me. So sometimes it is a challenge, it is a little discouraging, but if you take it to heart and think about why are you getting this advice, it can actually turn out to be for the extreme positive. And I do think that a lot of the faculty are quite willing to give that advice. I'm not sure that as students we're always willing to listen to that advice. And so I do think that those are situations that play out again and again about somebody is trying to give you the right advice, but you got to be open to listen to it also.
I think I'm going to start asking Bruce for more advice.
Okay. Okay. So I want to circle back to the internship and what grad students are supposed to be doing. So, Arvind, when you and I defined C3SR strategy and so on, one of the most important components was internship, Our goal was to have at least 50 grad students do internship in the summer at IBM every year, right? And I really think that was the right decision, because Illinois, in many ways, is in the middle of nowhere, right? And we really need to encourage our grad students to go out and discuss problems, discuss their vision with more mature researchers in industry, right? Or even product people in industry. And internships are really fantastic means for that. And I still remember in 2018, one of my students went to your cloud research group, and we built a BAM in the summer, and that was not a cheap labor. The group intentionally let my student build a prototype of the research because they want to see some research, in the future, right? And the student maintained IBM access through the 3 years of the graduate school, right? So this is a joint appointment that you're talking about. And that enabled the student to build something that currently is the foundation of the entire software stack that we're building at NVIDIA today. And I really, really appreciate what the IBM research culture was able to help the student. And today, when I do internship at, I have a small group at NVIDIA, and I only have 3 internship slots. But I always reserve budget so that I can continue a 2-hour per week appointment with the student through the year, so that I can give the student continued access to the resources and so on at NVIDIA for exactly the reason I learned from you, right? So going back to the AI question, everyone in my team had 8-9 agents running on their screen all the time doing research stuff. And guess what they do for the rest of their time? Now they're going around and talk to people more, and they're going to the engineering teams and build more relationships and so on. And I actually think that AI may be an important way for some of the grad students to return more to the pizza hours. And I still remember, over the years, I see that fewer and fewer students are willing to go to the pizza hour because they're too busy. They're too busy writing simulators. They're too busy doing some experiments. But if AI can do some of those, maybe students can go back and spend more time talking to each other, talking to faculty, talking to industry connections, and form the ideas. But I really think that ideas will fundamentally change the world in the future, not just the grinding of the simulation, data tabulation, and any of that. So I really hope that that's what AI is going to do for us. Finally, for CSL, we had a gathering of former CSL students last summer. There were about 30 former PhD students who show up in Los Gatos, California. And one thing that I learned from quite a few students is that they told me that CSL is special because it's outside the department. So for many grad students, it actually kind of interestingly become a home outside their classes and their grading and their all the academic evaluation kind of things, and they go to classes in the departments, but then they go back to CSL as a home. And I think psychologically that gives these students a sense of belonging and a sense of comradeship. So that seems to be something that I never hear from a lot of these other places, such as Berkeley, MIT, and so on. And Stanford, to a certain degree, has a similar culture. So I think our grad students have a lot more loyalty and a lot more fun memories about Illinois, probably because CSL became their home, a kind of a little bit of a haven outside their classes and exams and so on.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, maybe last question.
I think
I have a question about lifelong learning. What is the role of CSL in terms of the interdisciplinary research and education when our graduate students leave this place and might want to come back or might want to take micro-credentials? What do you think is the role of this kind of interdisciplinary research unit?
I'll make a couple of comments, but they're not so positive, actually. Every university has been working really hard on this, and there are only a few that have made any money off it, if that's one of the goals. And so I'm not saying CSL should not do anything in this realm, but I think you ought to go in with eyes wide open. And in this particular university, University of Illinois, has a long history in online education. And if you go back, it was around year 2000 or so, the university put a ton of money into a monster-sized project. And then my understanding is that it was closed. And yeah, conditions have changed, and now it's no longer so much about semester-length courses and degree programs. It is more about certificate programs and micro-credentials. But I would study things very carefully before I invested a lot of resources.
All right, I think Molly's been waiting. I'm going to have the last question.
Yeah, I have a question. From my perspective, is having PhD students from a couple of universities help my angel investment group conduct diligence on the various companies, startups that are applying for funding. And what was a big eye-opener for me in the fall, this most recent fall, was how the presence of AI changed the types of reports I was getting back from them, what was covered in the reports, what was happening to the confidential student company information, and what types of questions they were trying to ask, and the wording in the reports were like, our diligence team, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you're not a diligence team. You're an individual who's helping us in certain ways. Anyway, I wanted to ask, I've had to work hard on being much more pointed and directive in terms of what I'm looking for from them. But I'd love to hear anybody's insights into how they've had to work differently with their employees, or researchers, or students, or in order to get the sorts of results that they want in the presence of the world with AI.
Look, we use AI massively in most of the operations. You mentioned investing. I'll take the other side on the acquisition side. Historically, if you were acquiring anything of size, you did sampling because you couldn't really get a sense of 10,000 contracts. You're not going to pay enough lawyers to go read through 10,000 contracts. If you look at all of the problems the company has, and every company has them, you're not going to go do that. The ability to use AI to read everything, so it's no longer sampling, it's a 100% ingestion, and point out some of those things. But it takes a little bit of time to train the tools and to teach the people then how to use those tools for that purpose. An area that it is being used massively, people don't understand this, is around corporate taxation, finances. The use of AI now is across the board. The companies who do it don't even want to talk about it because they're not quite sure whether the general public is going to be negative or positive. There's a lot of industries in the world where historically the answer was we'll sample 1 in 10, 1 in 100, and that tells it to you. The ability of AI to be that cheap reader who can then compare things, is this roughly in the framework that we want, or is it an outlier, is allowing you to now go across the board. But it fundamentally changes the nature of the work also, because now the human is not doing what they used to be paid to do 5 years ago. The human now is doing higher order and higher level work, so you've got to teach them how to do that. This is going to go, I think, across the board in almost all operational activities. I mean, when we mentioned chip design, a couple of you also mentioned, I mean, you do chip design now, what the people are doing. If a human thinks they can do layout, which used to be even 5 years ago, they used to claim that they were the expert. They're delusional. I mean, these tools are becoming better and better across the board, where, yeah, you might find the 1 in 100 where somebody has one little line that could be better, but in general, this is there. But you've got to teach people that it's okay to do that, and your job is to tell the tool what to do.
Yeah, and I'll mention that, from a faculty perspective, we see part of the university. There's this huge side of the university that is the operations side. And I will guarantee AI is being used all over the place at the University of Illinois, outside of the classroom and outside of research.
Inside, too. Yeah. All right. I think we are pretty much past time, and so let's thank the panelists today.
Many, many years.
I would like to actually conclude the 2 days of amazing events, panels, presentations, keynotes, discussions. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And we will be definitely cherishing many, many of the comments that were made over the last 2 weeks and preserve over the last 2 days and preserve them for the next generations to really hear what our members have been saying and the history that this particular place has done. Thank you so much for coming, and have a safe trip home. Thank you.
I'd like to add a little bit, if I could. Claire's been talking about this for about 3 years. She said she's going to stay on as director of CSL for another 2 or 3 years so she can have this 75th anniversary. And I'd really like to thank her.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much again. I'll also thank all of you for being here. I want to thank our amazing panelists, Clara, one more time, and the entire staff, and the organizing committee, by the way, also. How many of you from the organizing committee are here? Maybe you can stand up, please. Just stand up, the organizing committee. All right. Thank you, and Clara. Thank you again. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you for just this amazing 2 days, amazing energy, and all of the wonderful discussion. And this is about building the future. And thank you so much for all of the great ideas, for helping us continue to be on this path. The path to excellence and impact is not an endpoint, it's a journey. And again, we need to just stay on it. And I hope that just like we're talking about now, the past 75 years, I think the next big party might be at 25 years from now, maybe 10 years, maybe 25 years. So we'll see. But certainly you can see that we are celebrating important milestones. But please stay in touch, and we'll have other opportunities for all of you to come back. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
I was Rashid's first department chair.